It's now 6:50, 10 before 7. The United Way of Southern Arizona and First Things First, which is an early childhood education group, brought a renowned child psychologist to Tucson Tuesday night. His name is Dr. David Elkind. And I was invited to be there. A friend of ours was putting it on and invited us out for this talk. He was talking about the power of play in children's lives, which sounds pretty straightforward. That's what kids do, right? They play. But among the things he said, and it was fascinating to me because obviously my wife Kim and I are raising a soon-to-be 3-year-old, and we're first-time parents, so it's all new to us. And we're, of course, always interested in what the experts have to say. Whether or not you subscribe to everything is another deal. But some of the stuff he was talking about was talking statistically that kids have, over the last several years, lost about 10 to 12 hours of what he calls free play every week because they're being shuffled into organized activity.
Overscheduled.
Yeah. He talked about peer-to-peer socialization and how that's rapidly disappearing in favor of keeping kids indoors, learning how to use the computer instead. So instead of getting together with their friends and being creative and playing games. And because of that, he said, really, kids need to learn the real world before they experience the virtual world, and it'll have repercussions all the way throughout their lives. You know, he's talking about the changing social dynamics in workplaces and how people are more spoiled or expect more or whatever. And all of this comes, in his opinion, from the fact that kids aren't as socialized as they used to be when we were growing up, and our, ancestors were too. He said a lot of it has to do with adults tend to contrast work and play as opposites. They feel like if you're not working, you're wasting time. But for kids especially, they're really closely related. Play is work, and it's a chance to learn new things. And so he brought up, this Dr. David Elkind brought up the fact that some of the most playful workplaces, in fact, as adults, tend to be some of the most creative and also some of the most successful. He cited Google as an example, where they have fun. They're encouraged to, play ping pong in the, lunchroom. And think outside the box and all that stuff. And they've obviously had a lot of success doing that. And he talked about, when kids play a board game like Chutes and Ladders, they're not only learning strategy, but they're also learning body language and communication skills with their peers, and why all that stuff is important. It's totally valid to let them do that. And you used the word over-programmed, I think. And he did too.
Overscheduled and
and over-supervised, he even said. He argued that Little League is something that's really great, but he also said taking a group of kids to the park and then you just standing back so that you're there to make sure that everything's okay, but you're not organizing the event. He said they'll come up with games. They'll come up with rules. There'll be things like no touchbacks, and you can't do that. And there are arguments, and they work through problems and all of this stuff. So it was just one of those fascinating things that, when you listen to an expert who really knows their stuff, and then, of course, he had great anecdotes and stories of kids who'd been successful and things that he'd witnessed. But I love that sort of thing, and I feel like we need more good influence on parents these days. It seems like you're getting bombarded with all these messages. I know when we watch TV that's programmed for our daughter, there are lots of ads for these learning educational videos and how you can get your kid learning 12 languages by the time they're 4 and all that stuff. And I think some of that is good. I mean, kids are sponges. They'll absorb everything that you give them. But it's also important to just let them be kids. You know what I mean?
Right.
We tend to put a lot of pressure on them pretty early.
If they don't learn to socialize with each other now, when are they supposed to do that? If they're so wrapped up in computer games and video games and all of these organized activities where adults are managing that whole thing. So it's like, okay, how are you going to be able to make these decisions on your own and work through issues?
You still got to be able to relate to other people.
Wow, very cool stuff.
Yeah. 6:54. Thanks for letting me go through that a little bit.
No, I would love to hear more sometime.
It's 94.9 Mix FM.